Hey, this is Beverly Whalen from the Art Barn, and we're going to paint a season tree today. It will be of all 4 seasons, but very simplified version, and I think a beginner would be able to do it. You can always add more detail and do extra things to it, but I want to give you the basics today. So I'm going to turn the phone to my canvas and to my easel. The light is shining that way, so we'll set it up so you can see this. There we go. I always have trouble knowing exactly how to do this. I want you to be able to see from my direction, but I also want you to be able to observe the whole canvas. There we go. Maybe that will work. Move it down just slightly. And I can move my canvas over as well as we need to. All right. Now this is a refurbished canvas. I had a painting on here, and I covered it all up with an item called acrylic gesso, and I put a couple of coats on. Since we're doing a sky today, and I already had a sky before I covered it up with gesso, I didn't worry about putting too many coats on, and I thought we'd try some different techniques as well. There's basically 2 sky colors in this painting. One is for spring and summer, and one is for fall and winter. The spring and summer one is blue, and the winter one is gray. It comes down into snow on this side, and then of course green grass on this side. So the first color we're going to mix up would be a blue and a white for the sky. We've already got the basic color here covered up with gesso, but now we're going to make it clear. And the value of this would be at a medium value, because the tree is the focal point. The tree is the thing you're going to look at. So we call that a focal point. It's also the area of the most contrast. That's where you're going to have your detail. Now the background, the sky, behind it is going to be a little duller. It's not going to be so bright that it stands out darker against the tree. So that's why I'm going to add some white to this blue. We're going to actually have 3 different values. We're going to have a medium blue, and we're going to add some white to that blue, and we're going to have go to the gray, which of course you'd have to add white for the gray, so I'm going to put it over here. Well, yeah, that'll work. Because in a winter painting, it's going to look cold and icy. Okay. So let's start with the left side of our sky, which is behind the tree. And let's do a little bit of mixing here. Let's put a little bit of white and blue together. We have a light blue. You could do this on your canvas as well, and then you have your medium blue. Usually 3 different values, but since this sky is going to be 4 different seasons, you're actually going to have 4 different values in the sky, and I know it's not going to be realistic, so you have to keep that in mind. Okay. Now for a regular sky, we always do the top part of the sky darker than the bottom, because the bottom of the sky is farther away. And I want to use a technique here we call stippling, scrubbling. I'm going to start with the dark blue up here, I'm going to go all different directions. It's not going to be a realistic sky. It's just going to be scrumbled on. I think I'm going to have to put more blue on my palette. That's a good idea for you too. Just going to go about halfway, but of course we're going to mix some of that gray in there too. Go ahead and sprinkle it down here, and then I'm going to go back. You could do that with this brush or try a sponge. Probably have to wet your sponge first, and if you want a sponge look, you could go over that area with a sponge. Round and round first till the sponge softens up. The sponge is still pretty stiff. I want it to soften. That's better. Okay, now it's going to get drippy. Okay, now the ground is all the way down here, so let's add some white to that mix down here. Let's go back with the sponge. It's better. I'll save my sponge for the final coat. I think I like that brush better. Sometimes you just have to experiment. I've done this several times with different backgrounds with different methods. And it seems to, okay, I like that effect better, but I definitely need more white to make it look like a spring and summer sky. So I'm going to take my palette knife, go back to my white paint, add some here. I probably ought to add some right on the canvas to mix in with that to really lighten it up. Now the gradation is important as well. You want to make sure that everything goes smoothly together. Where did I put my brush? I really like that brush. This is just a hardware brush, something you could pick up at the hardware store. It's real nice for stippling and for technique, texture. It's not the kind of brush you would use in a realistic painting usually. Want to go with a nylon or sable brush. Some people get pig hair brushes. My kids got me some pig hair brushes for my birthday one year. They're pretty fancy. Okay, now let's go over this and stipple a little bit. Do you see how it goes gradually from dark to light? Now I'm trying to get that texture in there by stippling. I like this better than the sponge, I think. Try the sponge again. I'm not against that. But at least I'm getting a gradation from dark to light and from light to dark. And you can't really tell, if you can tell, where it's one color starts and one color stops, then you need to go back over it again. Let's try that sponge. Try to make sure that the pigments are not, trying to avoid any brush strokes. Make sure that it's nice and rough. Nice and rough. What a duel on words, huh? Now, let's go to the other side. This is spring and summer, and then we're going to go winter, and it's going to be darker at the top than it is at the bottom because it's going to come down for snow. So, we can do the same effect, but make sure your brush is clean. can start with the black and then add white to it, or mix it up. I got a lot of water in the ferrule there. When you get water in the ferrule of a brush, and usually cheap brushes, that's pretty easy to do. Just watch. Some of it went dripping, so gonna have to go back over it with the sponge. There we go. I'm gonna like the effect when it dries. It's a real neat background, like that. Okay, now got the water out of the ferrule, got a pretty dry brush. I'm going to go to the black, maybe mix it with some of that white for gray, but I'm still going to have to add more white, aren't I? Now I'm going to do a gradation between the black and the blue by going between those with the gray. So it'll be a gradual change from the blue to the gray. Okay. Now much of this is going to be covered up by your tree. It's going to gradually, we're just getting the pigment on here first. It's going to gradually go to snow, so that sky gets lighter as it reaches the ground. Get all that together. The transition should be gradual. The gradation should be gradual. Now, I'm going to go back with my brush and do that stippling effect. You'd almost think it's snowing in the background, huh? There we go. I'm going to clean my brush before I get to the horizon. There we go. Over here, we got some drippy going. So, I'm going to wash my brush out and take a better brush here that is not too wet. Pull some of this back up and stipple before it dries. There we go. Just make sure you don't get gray in the blue, because you want to differentiate between the seasons. Okay, now I'm going to wash that brush and we're going to go to the snow. I think I need more white for the snow, and I need a smoother brush because I don't want it to look like the sky. So I'm going to grab a smoother brush here. Let's see, it's a little one, but it'll work. Up. There we go. Cover up any of that. That kind of has the effect of snow. Snow is not pure white. It's got some shadows in it, of course. There we go. Add some more white. Put that on the top so the shadows will stand out beneath it. Okay. Down here, keep your strokes horizontal for the snow. It's going to be a gradual slope up to the tree. And go here. And then we're going to do some other color stuff, but we'll probably do a lot of the orange and the brown color when we put in the fall foliage. Here on the left side, you have green grass. So I'm going to add some green. Now you can make green by adding yellow and blue together if you have just yellow and blue. I like the green I have because it's nice and bright. And I can also diminish its value by adding some red or black to it. Let's add a little bit of black here since I already have it on my palette. That's kind of a dull green. And I want a bright green too. I can fill in this area with the dark color first as a background for my green. Can you see that all right? I'm filling this in over here with my dark color mixed with green. This would be the darkest value of green that I want to use. Okay. There we go. I'll let that dry. Now there's a transition here, so we're going to have to ease it up somehow. And we are going to add some fall leaves in the middle there, so that will be the breaking point. But there's no harm in trying to make it smooth a little bit ahead of time, so there's not a definite difference between the white and the dark green. You can always soften that up with a rag. Okay. Now, we've got to let some of this dry before we can add our tree. This is acrylic paints, and I like using acrylics. They do dry fast. I also have a blow dryer handy here. So I'm going to use the blow dryer for a little bit. See if we can get some of that dry before we go on. Okay. Grab that. I don't know how old this blow dryer is. My mom had it and I inherited it when she passed away. Maybe I should move it over a little bit. I really got this paint wet, wetter than I planned on, probably because of the hardware brush. I haven't used one for a while. If you use a little bit of better brush and the water doesn't get in the ferrule, you're probably good. What we might do is go ahead and scratch out the size of the tree, the roots, the trunk, and the branches while it's wet. Give it a little bit of time to dry, and then we can go back with paint. You could do it with a pencil. After your background dries, you could take a pencil and draw your tree. It's a lot easier to draw it on top of the background rather than to try to draw it first before you put your background in. I think the gray is drying pretty nice. But the blue is really wet. Okay, well, let's see. Let's give it a little bit of time and go ahead, scratch out the tree. Where it's going to be. Now, I'm going to make an old oak tree, and then its branches, of course the trunk is going to be in the middle here. It's going to be the focal point. Your tree is always larger on the bottom than it is on the top. A little bit of a curved line is helpful here. Then your roots, think of your roots going outward. And your roots, of course, are skinny. Boy, that's not showing up, is it? Well, we can go the other direction. Let's take a long liner brush, get our black out again, roll our brush, roll our liner brush in the black, and make the outline with the black. Part of my background is dry and part of it's wet, so we'll see how this goes. Okay, those curved lines, do you see them? I'm going to make them there. Did you see me roll that brush? If you don't know how to roll a brush, let me get it where you can see it. A liner brush is a thin, with a pointer tip. If you roll the brush back and forth, roll it in a circular motion, then you come up with a finer tip at the bottom. This is a large liner brush, almost like a round, but it's nice and long. The bristles are nice and long so that you can load a lot of paint on it. Then you end up with a little dabble of paint at the end. Make your simple lines. We'll just make an outline of a tree. Those are two curved lines there. Bring out the roots. Of course, we're going to do this in brown. This is just kind of like the outline. And always keep it curved outward and inward. When your brush starts drying up, you wet it, go back to your paint, roll it a little bit more. And now we're going to go up here, since we have the basic trunk and roots in, which we'll refine later. We're going to go ahead and do some branches up here to help with spreading out the tree. Real thin. The lighter touch you have, the thinner your line will be. If you press too hard on your brush, even if it has a thin tip, it will cause the line to be too thick. So keep it light, very light. Keep it curved, not too I like my branches curved, not too severe. There might be a few angled lines in there. Let's do the same thing on the other side to keep symmetry going. That's still a little bit wet, so let's see how it responds. Not too bad. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. You just want that symmetry of knowing that it's balanced. It has to be balanced. Mixing with that wet paint kind of gives it a neat effect. I'm rolling my brush again. And I'm going to go to this side, do some more branches. Now this is a fatter one at the bottom. I'm going to keep that fat. And outside of those fat ones, you're going to have some skinny ones. Those details might not be as important as the foliage on the tree because of the seasons, but right now try to think of this tree as an old oak with straggly branches. It's thicker at the bottom, it gets thinner as it goes higher, outward. A little bit of water, roll your brush. I'm going to do the other side. Try to keep that going. And let's go to the next branch. Make sure that I'm getting a good feel for this. I want the tree to go more of an umbrella look, so my next branches up are going to be a little bit shorter or smaller than the ones going out here. Do you see the umbrella effect? I could go farther out here with this branch, extend these branches to make it look more like an umbrella. Half circle, oval. Now we're going to go here, and I'm going to pretend this tree is above the top of the canvas. It almost has to be, but to see the different foliage, it's going to have to be this big to be the centerpiece in a landscape setting. So let's go here, let's go here, another branch. Let's do the basic branch, then we go back and do the little branches. Do you see how I'm turning my brush? I'm rolling it and I'm turning it as I make my branches, just barely touching, little branches coming off of the big ones, crossing over some others. I don't want it to get too crazy or it will detract from the beauty of the tree. But I want it to be real enough that you'd be able to say, oh yeah, that's an old oak tree. Sure. One way you can make it look like an old oak tree is put one of those splits down in the trunk, and we'll go around that with brown. Okay. Now up here, we're going to have summer and fall. We might not see a whole lot of those branches, but we still need to see a few to put the leaves on. Okay, now I'm going to rinse my brush, and I'm going to think shadow here. Really, since we've got winter over here and summer over here, it doesn't make any sense to place the light source in one certain spot. So I'm just going to pretend like the light is shining on the whole tree from the front, and we're going to, we've already outlined the trunk, so we're going to go to our brown and fill in that trunk with some brown, maybe a mixture of brown and black. Burnt umber, if you have a burnt umber, would work for this. My brown is more like a burnt sienna, and it's got a reddish tint to it, but for an old oak tree, you probably want to mix some black with that. Then we're going to go over it with some lighter. We can do two values here. So I'm going to fill this in with my brown mixed with black or burnt umber color. Bring it down. Keep your strokes. Downward and outward. Really does make a difference where you put your strokes in a painting. For example, if you started going like this at the base of the tree, you're going to give the impression that the bark is running that way, but the growth of the tree goes from the roots up, and that's one thing that you want to demonstrate with your strokes. Is not that there's not bark, there is bark, and we'll go back and put some bark lines in there, but to keep it, keep the strokes going in the right direction. That's so important. Okay, as I'm touching my brush, I'm turning, curving, outward then inward, trying to keep these beautiful, even though they're roots, I'm trying to think, oh, they need to have beauty to them. And It doesn't really matter how many you put in there, just so they look even, balanced, and beautiful. Now here we go with the fill in those parts where we outlined the trunk, not the trunk, the branches. And then we'll go, the black is going to be sufficient for the outward branches, the little ones. We're just going to need to fill in the ones that reach the trunk of the tree here. If you see any spots that are empty, fill those in. Kind of mixing with that blue gives it a neat effect. That blue is not completely dry yet. I loaded my brush again. Okay. Now, you can do that. You have a basic tree here, and I covered up my knots. So I'm going to go back to my black, and I'm just making kind of like a teardrop and a round curved line, a curved line on the left side and a curved line on the right side. And that will fill in. I'm going to put a little bit of black inside that's stronger. Okay, now let's go back to that reddish brown, because in the fall we're going to see some red brown leaves, and part of that trunk needs to have a little bit of red-brown color. So we're going to bring that down kind of, let's see, the fall is going to be up here, so let's bring it down this way. Dab it on, bring in some of that color. We always want to use color throughout our paintings, good color theory to keep it where it'll work for us, and keep it throughout, not to isolate your color in certain areas. The edges are important too. I saw an edge that wasn't covered up there, so I went back and this caught the edge and made sure that the edge was nice and clean. Okay, remember this green part over here? I did a dark green for the background, and all I really need to do is to put some grassy color on there. So I'm going to grab a fan brush from behind, and while my green is out, whoops, that's not a fan brush. I thought I grabbed a fan brush. There we go. Okay, I'm going to dip a little bit in water, grab some green, put on my palette. Now I need a medium green over the top of that dark green that I just put on. Then I might have to add some yellow